A twist of fate. The cold air of the city night bit sharply as it swirled through the cracked, shadowy streets. Malik, a scrawny boy of barely 13, adjusted his torn hoodie and clutched his thin arms closer to his chest. The threadbare fabric did little against the sharp chill, but Malik didn't stop moving. He had learned long ago that standing still in this city meant trouble. People only noticed you if you were in their way. He wandered toward the familiar alleyway behind Big Joe's diner. The trash bins, there were sometimes a jackpot for half-eaten sandwiches or a discarded container of soup. Malik moved quietly, his steps soft against the pavement, eyes darting left and right. He knew better than to draw attention. As he approached the bin, Malik scanned the area for the familiar faces of other street kids. They had their unspoken territories, and this one belonged to him, at least tonight. With a swift glance to ensure no one was watching, Malik slipped behind the diner and began rummaging. His fingers worked quickly through crumpled paper and plastic wrappers until they found a treasure. A nearly untouched burger, still wrapped. Malik's mouth watered as he grabbed it, unwrapping it like it was a rare gem. He took a careful bite, savoring the taste of real meat and bread. Suddenly, the door to the back of the diner banged open, and Malik froze. Big Joe himself appeared, his broad frame filling the doorway. His round face, slick with sweat, twisted into a scowl as his eyes landed on Malik. "Hey, you little rat." Joe's booming voice echoed through the alley. "Get out of here. You think this is a charity." Malik didn't wait for a second warning. Dropping the burger, he bolted, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of Joe's curses faded as Malik darted around a corner, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't stop running until he reached the bridge on the edge of the city. The bridge was Malik's usual retreat. It wasn't much, a concrete walkway with a view of the wide, dark river below, but it was quiet. Trouble rarely found him there. As the orange glow of the setting sun painted the horizon, Malik slowed his pace and leaned against the railings, catching his breath. But tonight, something was different. There was someone else on the bridge. A man stood alone near the edge, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the rundown surroundings. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, his hair neatly combed. But it wasn't his appearance that caught Malik's attention. It was the way he stood, leaning too far over the railing, staring down at the rushing river below. Malik's stomach twisted. He didn't know much about people, but he knew what hopelessness looked like. He'd seen it in his reflection every day. The man didn't move, his shoulders hunched as if the weight of the world was crushing him. Malik hesitated. He wasn't sure why he cared. Rich people in suits weren't his problem. But something in the man's posture called to him, a silent plea for help. Taking a deep breath, Malik stepped closer, his sneakers scuffing against the concrete. "Hey," he called, his voice shaking slightly. The man didn't respond. Malik edged closer, his heart pounding. You okay?" he asked, trying again. This time, the man turned his head slightly, just enough for Malik to see his face. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression hollow. Malik's throat tightened. He recognized that look, the same look he saw in the mirror when the nights were too cold and his stomach was too empty. "I'm fine," the man muttered, his voice thick and distant. Malik shook his head, his nerves giving way to frustration. "You don't look fine," he said, louder this time. "You look like you're about to do something really dumb." The man let out a bitter laugh, but it was empty, devoid of humor. "What do you care, kid? Go home." "Don't have one," Malik shot back without thinking. "And even if I did, doesn't mean I want to watch you jump." The man flinched, as though the words had struck him. He looked down at the river again, the dark water swirling below. Malik moved closer, close enough to reach out and touch the man's sleeve. He didn't, though. He was scared that even the smallest push might send him over the edge. "Whatever's got you here," Malik said, his voice softer now. "It can't be worse than this. It can't." The man was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he straightened, stepping back from the railing. He turned to look at Malik, his face etched with exhaustion. For a moment, the two just stared at each other, one man on the brink of giving up, and one boy who had never had the chance to try. "Who are you?" the man asked finally, his voice hoarse. Malik shrugged. "Just a kid who doesn't want to see you do something stupid." The man nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete. Malik watched him go, his chest tightening. He didn't know if he'd done enough, but at least the man was walking away. As the night deepened, Malik found a corner of the bridge to huddle in. He pulled his hoodie tighter around himself and leaned against the cold concrete, his body trembling from the adrenaline. He didn't know why he had gotten involved, why he had cared about some stranger in a suit. But as he drifted off to sleep, he felt a small flicker of warmth. For once, he had done something that mattered. When the sun rose the next morning, Malik woke to the sound of footsteps. He sat up groggily, rubbing his eyes. Standing a few feet away was the man from the night before, but he looked different now. His tie was gone, his shirt rumpled, and his eyes were clearer. In his hands was a small paper bag. "I figured you'd still be here," the man said, his voice softer than before. He stepped closer, holding out the bag. "It's breakfast. Thought you might need it." Malik stared at the bag, his stomach growling. Slowly, he reached out and took it, the smell of fresh bread wafting up as he opened it. "Why?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Why'd you come back?" The man knelt down so he was eye level with Malik, his expression serious. "Because you saved me," he said quietly. "And now, I owe you everything. The offer that changes everything." Malik stared at the man, confusion rippling through him. He clutched the paper bag tightly, the warmth of the food inside radiating into his fingers. It wasn't often someone gave him something without expecting anything in return, and his instincts told him to be wary. "You don't owe me anything," Malik muttered, lowering his gaze. "I didn't do it for this." The man sighed, lowering himself to sit cross-legged on the cold concrete beside Malik. He adjusted his shirt awkwardly, the pristine fabric crinkling as if it wasn't used to being treated so carelessly. "I know you didn't," the man said quietly. "That's why it matters." Malik didn't respond. He opened the bag, pulling out a croissant and a small carton of juice. The first bite was heavenly, the buttery pastry melting in his mouth. It wasn't stale or half-eaten, and the realization nearly brought tears to his eyes. He ate quickly, trying not to look desperate, though he knew he probably failed. The man watched him in silence, his gaze soft but intense, like he was trying to figure something out. Malik could feel the weight of it, and it made him uncomfortable. "Why are you still here?" he asked finally, not looking up. "You're not the first person I've talked to, you know. They usually just walk away." The man leaned back against the railing, exhaling slowly. "Because I can't just walk away. Not after what you did for me." Malik frowned, shoving the last piece of croissant into his mouth. He didn't like the way the man kept saying, "saved." It made what he did sound bigger than it was. "I didn't do anything," Malik said, his voice muffled by food. "You're the one who stepped back, not me." The man smiled faintly, though his expression was tinged with sadness. Sometimes stepping back is the hardest thing to do. And sometimes it takes a stranger to make you see that. He paused, his eyes scanning Malik's thin frame, the oversized hoodie swallowing him whole. "You shouldn't be out here, kid. You don't deserve this." Malik snorted, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Yeah, well, life's not about what you deserve, is it?" The man flinched as though Malik's words had struck him harder than expected. He rubbed the back of his neck, his jaw tightening. "Maybe not," he said after a moment, "but that doesn't mean you have to accept it. There's more out there, Malik." Hearing his name caught Malik off guard. He stiffened, narrowing his eyes. How do you know my name? The man raised his hands in a placating gesture. You told me last night, he said quickly. Remember? Malik blinked, trying to recall the conversation. He hadn't meant to share his name. It wasn't something he usually gave out. Names gave people power over you, his mom used to say. But something about this man, about the way he had looked at him last night, had made Malik let his guard down. Now he wasn't sure if that had been a mistake. What's your name? Malik asked, trying to sound nonchalant, though he was watching the man closely. You never said. Victor, the man said. Victor Kane. Malik frowned. The name sounded important, like it should mean something, but he couldn't place it. Victor Kane, he repeated, rolling the name over his tongue. What kind of name is that? Victor chuckled softly, though there was little humor in it. The kind that comes with too many expectations and not enough answers, he said cryptically. Then his tone grew serious. Look, Malik, I know you don't trust me. I don't blame you. If I were in your shoes, I wouldn't trust me either. But I meant what I said. I owe you. I told you, you don't owe me anything. Malik said sharply, his stomach twisting. I don't need charity. Victor shook his head, leaning forward. This isn't charity, he said firmly. This is me paying back a debt. You stopped me from making the worst mistake of my life. I don't know why you did it, but you did. And now, I want to help you. Malik shifted uncomfortably, his hands tightening around the juice carton. He hated this, being looked at like he was some kind of lost puppy. I don't need your help, he muttered. I've been fine on my own. Victor's gaze softened, but his voice remained steady. Have you? He asked gently. Sleeping on bridges, digging through trash for food. That's not fine, Malik. That's surviving. And you deserve more than that. Malik looked away, his jaw tightening. Why do you care? He demanded. You don't even know me. Victor hesitated, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Because I see a lot of myself in you, he admitted quietly. I know what it's like to feel like the world's against you, to feel like no one cares, and I know how much it hurts. Malik's chest tightened, the words hitting closer to home than he wanted to admit. He stared at the ground, his fingers picking at the edge of the juice carton. So what? He said finally. You're just gonna swoop in and fix everything. Give me a warm bed and 3 meals a day. It doesn't work like that. I'm not trying to fix you, Victor said, his voice steady but kind. I just want to give you a chance to figure out what you want, a chance to be more than this. Malik didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. He had spent so long fending for himself, so long believing that no one would ever care, that the idea of someone offering help, real help, felt foreign. Victor stood, brushing the dust off his pants. I know it's a lot to take in, he said, his tone understanding. I'm not asking for an answer right now. But if you want to take a chance, I'll be here. Same time tomorrow. Malik looked up, his eyes narrowing. And if I don't? Victor shrugged. Then I'll wish you the best of luck. But I hope you'll come. With that, Victor turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking softly against the concrete. Malik watched him go, his chest a swirling mix of emotions, confusion, anger, and something he didn't want to name. He looked down at the paper bag in his hands, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. A chance, Victor had said. But what did that even mean? Malik had never been given a chance at anything. He wasn't sure he even knew what to do with one. As the sun rose higher, casting its golden light over the city, Malik sat on the bridge, his thoughts tangled and restless. For the first time in a long time, he found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, things could be different. A hesitant step forward. Malik spent the rest of the day walking the streets of the city, his mind swirling with uncertainty. The cold pavement beneath his sneakers, the noise of car horns and distant chatter. It was all the same as it had been every day for the past few years. But something felt different now, like an invisible thread tugging at him, reminding him of the man on the bridge. Victor Kane. Malik didn't know why the name stuck in his head. It wasn't just because Victor had come back with food, or because he had knelt down and looked at him like he mattered. No, it was the way Victor had talked to him, like he wasn't just some kid scraping by in the shadows, like he was someone worth saving. By nightfall, Malik found himself back on the bridge, staring down at the dark river below. The city lights reflected on the water's surface, their glow fractured and scattered. He leaned against the railing, his stomach twisting with indecision. Could he really trust Victor? Could he risk taking whatever chance the man was offering? Malik had been burned too many times before to believe in good intentions. He'd seen it in the faces of social workers who promised to find him a home, only to forget about him a week later. In the volunteers who handed out sandwiches with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. No one ever stuck around. No one ever cared for long. So why should Victor be any different? The wind whipped through his hoodie, making Malik shiver. He tightened his arms around himself and closed his eyes, trying to block out the cold. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the memory of Victor's voice, steady and sincere. You deserve more than this. Morning came too quickly, the pale light of dawn spilling over the city skyline. Malik woke stiff and sore, his back pressed against the rough concrete wall of the bridge. He stretched, groaning softly, and rubbed his eyes. His stomach growled, reminding him that yesterday's croissant had been the only decent thing he'd eaten in days. As he stood and looked around, Malik saw Victor approaching from the far side of the bridge. The man wasn't wearing a suit this time, just a simple jacket and jeans, but he still carried himself with a kind of calm confidence that made him stand out. In his hand was another paper bag. "Morning," Victor said, stopping a few feet away. His voice was warm, but not pushy. "I wasn't sure if you'd come back." Malik shrugged, shoving his hands into his hoodie pockets. Didn't have anywhere else to be. Victor smiled faintly, holding out the bag. "Here, figured you might be hungry." Malik hesitated, eyeing the bag suspiciously, but hunger won out, and he reached for it, his fingers brushing against the warm paper. Inside was a sandwich, neatly wrapped, and a small bottle of orange juice. He tore into it without a word, the rich flavors flooding his mouth. Victor watched him eat, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything until Malik had finished and set the empty bag aside. "I meant what I said yesterday," Victor began, his tone serious. "I want to help you, Malik, but it's your choice." Malik wiped his mouth with his sleeve, glancing at Victor. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, his voice sharp. "You don't even know me." Victor exhaled, leaning against the railing. "Because I've been where you are," he said quietly. "Maybe not exactly, but close enough. And if someone hadn't stepped in to help me back then, I wouldn't be standing here now." Malik frowned, skeptical. "You? On the streets?" "Sure." Victor chuckled softly, though there was little humor in it. "Not the streets," he admitted, "but there was a time when I thought I had nothing left. No one to turn to, no way out. I got lucky. Someone gave me a second chance, and it changed everything." Malik folded his arms, his gaze fixed on the ground. "So now you're just paying it forward or something. Is that it?" "Maybe," Victor said with a shrug. "Or maybe I just don't like the idea of walking away from someone who reminds me of myself." He turned to face Malik fully, his expression earnest. "Look, I'm not going to pretend this is easy. It's not. But I can offer you a roof over your head, food to eat, and a chance to figure out what you want to do with your life. No strings attached." "No strings," Malik repeated, his tone skeptical. "That's what they all say." "I mean it," Victor said firmly. "You don't owe me anything. If you decide it's not for you, you can leave any time. But if you're willing to take a chance, I'll be there to help you." Malik stared at him, his mind racing. It sounded too good to be true, and yet Something about Victor felt different. He wasn't offering pity or acting like he was doing Malik a favor. He just seemed genuine. "Why should I trust you?" Malik asked finally, his voice quiet. Victor met his gaze, unflinching. "You don't have to," he said, "but I hope you'll let me prove that you can." The silence stretched between them, the hum of passing cars filling the air. Malik's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He wanted to say no, to walk away and keep living the life he knew. But deep down, a small part of him wondered, what if? "What's the catch?" Malik asked, narrowing his eyes. Victor smiled faintly. "No catch," he said, "just one condition." Malik tensed. "Knew it," he muttered. "What is it?" "You have to want this," Victor said simply. "I can't help you if you don't want to help yourself. That's all." Malik blinked, taken aback. It wasn't the answer he'd expected. For a moment, he just stood there, his mind spinning. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'll give it a shot. But just for a while. If it doesn't work out, you can leave any time," Victor finished, his smile widening. "No hard feelings." Malik swallowed hard, his chest tightening. He didn't know if he was making the right choice, but for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was his chance. "All right," Victor said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get you out of here. My car's parked nearby." Malik followed Victor across the bridge, his steps hesitant but steady. As they walked, he glanced back one last time at the spot where he had spent so many nights. The cold, the hunger, the loneliness, it was all he had ever known. But now, as he stepped into Victor's car and felt the warm air wash over him, Malik couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. A new world. Malik sat in the passenger seat of Victor's car, his hands resting awkwardly in his lap. The interior was spotless, with soft leather seats that seemed far too clean for someone like him to touch. Malik had never been in a car this nice before, and it made him uneasy, like he didn't belong here. He glanced at Victor, who was focused on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. The city blurred past the window, its familiar chaos now a background hum. Malik didn't know where they were going, and he hated not knowing. His stomach churned with nerves, and he clutched his hoodie tighter around him, trying to calm the unease that gripped him. Victor broke the silence first. "You don't talk much, do you?" Malik shrugged, not looking at him. "What's there to talk about?" Victor chuckled softly, but it wasn't mocking. "Fair enough," he said. "I just figured you might have some questions. About me, about where we're headed." Malik hesitated, his eyes flicking to Victor. "Yeah, actually," he said, his tone cautious. "Where are we going?" "To my place," Victor said simply. "It's nothing fancy, but it's safe. You'll have your own room, your own space. No pressure to do anything you're not ready for." Malik frowned, his hands tightening in his lap. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice sharp. "You don't know me. I could be lying to you. I could be a thief, a liar, a troublemaker." Victor interrupted gently, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I've heard it all before. And honestly, I don't care. I'm not doing this because I expect anything from you, Malik. I'm doing this because someone helped me once, and I want to pay it forward. That's all." Malik stared at him, trying to gauge whether he was being sincere. He wanted to believe Victor, but trust didn't come easy for him. It never had. They drove in silence for a while, the city gradually giving way to quieter neighborhoods. The streets here were lined with trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The houses were larger, with neatly trimmed lawns and flower beds bursting with color. It was a world away from the alleys and bridges Malik was used to. Victor turned onto a quiet street and pulled into the driveway of a modest house with a red front door. It wasn't the biggest house on the block, but it looked warm and inviting, with a small garden in the front yard and a porch swing that creaked softly in the wind. Malik stared at it, his throat tightening. "This is it," Victor said, turning off the engine. He glanced at Malik, his expression unreadable. "You ready?" Malik swallowed hard. "I guess." Victor smiled, stepping out of the car and grabbing a small duffel bag from the back seat. Malik followed reluctantly, his legs feeling like lead. As they approached the front door, Victor pulled out a key and unlocked it, pushing the door open with a soft creak. "Welcome home," Victor said, gesturing for Malik to step inside. Malik hesitated, standing on the threshold. The air inside was warm, carrying the faint scent of wood polish and something sweet like vanilla. He took a cautious step forward, his sneakers squeaking against the polished hardwood floor. The house was simple but comfortable. A cozy living room with a plush couch and a coffee table littered with magazines. A small dining area with a wooden table and mismatched chairs. The walls were decorated with framed photographs. Pictures of people laughing, hugging, celebrating. It felt lived in. Victor set the duffel bag down and turned to Malik. "Let me show you your room," he said, his tone gentle. He led Malik down a short hallway and stopped in front of a door. Pushing it open, he stepped aside to let Malik look inside. The room was small but tidy, with a single bed neatly made with a navy blue quilt. There was a dresser, a small desk by the window, and a closet with the door slightly ajar. A lamp on the nightstand cast a soft, golden glow over the space. "This is all yours," Victor said, leaning against the doorframe. "No rules, no expectations, just a place to call your own." Malik stepped inside, his fingers brushing against the quilt. The bed looked soft, the kind of bed he hadn't slept in for as long as he could remember. He turned to Victor, his brow furrowed. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why not someone else?" Victor smiled faintly. "Because you were there," he said simply. "Because you mattered enough to stop and help a stranger when no one else did." Malik didn't know how to respond. He dropped his gaze, his hands clenching at his sides. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "I don't even know if I belong here." Victor's expression softened. "You don't have to figure it all out today," he said. "Take your time. One step at a time. Okay." Malik nodded, though his chest still felt tight. He sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking slightly under his weight. It felt strange, being in a room like this, in a house like this. Like he had stumbled into someone else's life. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything," Victor said, stepping back. "Take all the time you need." As the door clicked shut, Malik looked around the room again, his mind racing. The desk, the dresser, the bed. It all felt too perfect, too clean. He was used to sleeping on concrete, his pillow nothing more than a rolled-up hoodie. This was something else entirely. For a long time, he just sat there, his hands gripping the edge of the bed. He didn't know how long he stayed like that. But eventually, exhaustion took over. He lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. The softness of the mattress was unfamiliar, but it wasn't unwelcome. As the house settled into quiet, Malik closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was close. Cracks in the armor. The sun streaming through the window woke Malik before he was ready. He squinted, groaning softly as he sat up in the unfamiliar bed. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. The softness of the mattress, the warmth of the quilt. It all felt alien, like a dream. Then it hit him. Victor's house. The offer. The chance he reluctantly agreed to take. His stomach twisted with uncertainty. Part of him wanted to pack up and leave before Victor got tired of him, before the kindness turned into pity or annoyance. But another part of him, the smaller, quieter part, wanted to see if this could really work. If maybe, just maybe, Victor wasn't like everyone else. Malik swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood, the wood floor cool beneath his bare feet. He hesitated, glancing toward the door. He hadn't heard Victor moving around yet, and the house was eerily silent. Malik wasn't sure if he was supposed to wait for Victor or go downstairs on his own. His instincts screamed at him to be cautious, to stay out of the way. Finally, hunger won out. He opened the door slowly, peering into the hallway before stepping out. The floor creaked under his weight, and Malik winced. He padded toward the kitchen, his eyes darting around, ready to retreat at the first sign of trouble. Victor was already there, standing at the stove with his back to Malik. The scent of frying eggs filled the air, and Malik's stomach growled loudly, betraying him. Victor turned, a spatula in hand and a small smile on his face. "Morning," he said, his tone light. "I didn't think you'd be up so early." Malik shrugged, stuffing his hands into his hoodie pockets. "Didn't sleep much," he admitted. He hesitated, glancing at the plates Victor had set out on the counter. "You cooking for me?" Victor chuckled. "Of course. You like eggs, right? If not, I can make something else." Malik nodded, his throat tightening. He wasn't used to this, someone cooking for him, someone caring enough to ask what he liked. "Eggs are fine," he mumbled. Victor slid the eggs onto 2 plates and gestured for Malik to sit at the small kitchen table. Malik obeyed reluctantly, feeling awkward as he settled into one of the chairs. Victor joined him a moment later, setting the plates down and grabbing 2 glasses of orange juice. They ate in silence at first, the clinking of forks against plates the only sound. Malik kept his head down, focusing on his food. It was good, simple, but warm and filling. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a meal like this. Victor broke the silence. "I was thinking," he said casually, "maybe we could go out later, get you some clothes, a few things for your room." Malik tensed, his fork pausing midair. "I don't need anything," he said quickly. "I'm fine." Victor tilted his head, his expression calm but firm. "I'm not saying you need it," he said, "but it might make things more comfortable. Besides, it's not about need. It's about giving you a fresh start." Malik frowned, his chest tightening. He hated the idea of taking more than he deserved, of letting Victor spend money on him. "I don't want to owe you," he muttered. "You don't," Victor said immediately, his voice steady. "This isn't about debt or charity. It's just what people do when they care about each other." Malik looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit. But Victor's expression was open, sincere. Malik didn't know what to make of it. He wasn't used to people like Victor, people who gave without expecting anything in return. After a long pause, Malik nodded reluctantly. "Okay," he said quietly. "But just a few things. Nothing fancy." Victor smiled, relief flickering in his eyes. "Deal." The trip to the store was both overwhelming and surreal. Malik had never been in a department store before, not as a customer, anyway. The sheer size of the place, the rows and rows of clothes and shoes, made his head spin. Victor walked beside him, giving him space, but occasionally pointing out something he thought Malik might like. Malik stuck to the basics: jeans, plain t-shirts, socks, and a hoodie that actually fit him. When Victor suggested a pair of sneakers, Malik hesitated, staring at the price tag with wide eyes. "That's too much," he said, shaking his head. "I can't." "Malik," Victor interrupted gently, "it's fine. You need shoes that fit, and these will last you a long time. Don't worry about the cost." Malik frowned, his hands clenching into fists. He wanted to argue, but Victor's calm demeanor made it hard. Reluctantly, he nodded, letting Victor add the sneakers to the pile. They left the store with several bags, and Malik felt a strange mix of gratitude and guilt. He hadn't asked for any of this, and part of him felt like he didn't deserve it. But another part of him, the part that had started to trust Victor, just a little, felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he could get used to this. Maybe he could start to believe in a life that wasn't just about surviving. Back at the house, Malik unpacked his new clothes and carefully folded them into the dresser in his room. The sight of the neatly stacked shirts and jeans felt surreal, like they belonged to someone else. He ran his fingers over the fabric, marveling at how soft and clean it all was. Victor knocked on the doorframe, leaning against it with a small smile. "How's it looking?" he asked. Malik shrugged. "Good, I guess," he said, though his voice lacked confidence. Victor stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over the dresser and the bed. "It's a start," he said. "We'll figure the rest out as we go." Malik sat down on the edge of the bed, his hands resting in his lap. "Why are you doing all this?" he asked, his voice quiet. "You barely know me." Victor sighed, sitting in the chair by the desk. "I told you, Malik," he said, "because I've been where you are, because I know what it's like to feel like no one cares." He paused, his gaze steady. "And because I see potential in you. I don't know what your story is, but I know you've got more strength than you realize. I just want to help you see that." Malik swallowed hard, his chest tightening. He wanted to believe Victor, but it was hard to let his guard down after so many years of disappointment. "What if I screw it up?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor smiled gently. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. "You don't have to do this alone, Malik. Not anymore." For the first time in years, Malik felt a tiny spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him think that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. And for now, that was enough. Later that evening, after Malik had put away his new clothes and settled into his room, the house felt quieter than it ever had before. The sounds of the outside world, cars honking, people shouting, the hum of the city, seemed distant, as if the walls of the house were keeping it all at bay. For the first time in a long while, Malik felt a strange sense of stillness, one that almost felt foreign. He sat on the bed again, staring out the window at the street below. The soft, golden glow of the streetlights illuminated the sidewalk, casting long shadows on the ground. Malik's mind kept drifting back to the conversation he'd had with Victor earlier that day. The promise of a fresh start, of something different, seemed both impossible and like something he desperately needed. Malik wasn't sure if he could truly accept this life, this stability. He had spent so long on the streets, moving from one place to the next, never knowing where he would sleep or if he'd have enough to eat. How could he trust that any of this would last? He ran his fingers over the soft fabric of the quilt on the bed. This wasn't real, was it? Everything in his life had been built on survival, on keeping his head down and getting by. But here, in this house with clean floors and the smell of home-cooked meals, it felt like he was supposed to be someone he didn't know how to be. Malik leaned back against the pillows, closing his eyes. He tried to focus on the quiet of the room, the absence of noise, the comfort of a soft bed. But his thoughts kept racing. What if this is too good to be true? What if Victor's just doing this out of guilt or some misplaced sense of responsibility? The doubts crept back in, the same ones that always showed up whenever things started to feel too good. His phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. Malik grabbed it from the nightstand, his brow furrowing when he saw the message. It was a simple text from Victor. "I'm proud of you for taking the first step today. Don't forget, I'm here if you need anything." Malik stared at the words for a long moment. The text wasn't anything remarkable, but something about it tugged at him. Proud of me, Malik thought. No one had ever said that to him before. His parents, his mom, had always tried her best, but they had never been able to escape the cycle of poverty and hardship. And when she was gone, well, no one else had ever cared enough to stick around. The idea of someone being proud of him, of someone genuinely believing in him, felt strange. He didn't know what to do with it. As he sat there, thinking, the soft sound of footsteps approached his door. Malik quickly put the phone down, sitting up as the door creaked open. Victor poked his head in, a warm smile on his face. "Hey," he said, How are you holding up?" Malik shifted uncomfortably, his hands fidgeting. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice didn't quite match the words. He cleared his throat, avoiding Victor's gaze. "Just thinking." Victor nodded, stepping into the room and leaning against the doorframe. "About what?" "About everything," Malik said, his voice quiet. "About this. All of it." Victor paused for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then, with an easy smile, he said, "It's a lot, I know. But that's okay. You don't have to have it all figured out right now." He tilted his head slightly. "You're not in this alone, Malik. That's what you need to remember." Malik bit his lip, feeling the sting of unshed emotions. "I don't know how to be normal," he admitted. The words felt strange coming out of his mouth. "I don't know how to trust people, how to act like this is real." Victor stepped closer, his voice steady. "You don't need to be normal, Malik. You just need to be you. And if you need time to figure things out, that's fine too. No one's rushing you." For the first time, Malik felt the weight of his own defenses begin to crack. His arms, which had been tightly folded across his chest, relaxed slightly. There was something about Victor's voice, the way he said, "No one's rushing you," that made Malik feel like he wasn't a burden or a project. He wasn't just someone Victor had taken pity on. He was a person, someone with his own story, his own needs. "I've been alone for so long," Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to let someone help." Victor's expression softened, and he took another step toward the bed. He didn't say anything at first, just watched Malik with an understanding that made Malik feel exposed, but not ashamed. It was as if Victor could see all the cracks inside him, the cracks he had spent years trying to hide. "You don't have to do it all at once," Victor said quietly. "And you don't have to let me in all at once, either. But you are allowed to let people help. You are allowed to trust someone who wants to be there for you." Malik felt something tight in his chest, loosened just a little. He was still scared, still unsure, but for the first time in a long while, he felt the stirrings of hope. It wasn't a big feeling. It wasn't a guarantee. But it was enough for him to believe that maybe this could work. Maybe he could let go of the fear that had kept him from living, from being anything other than the kid who just survived. "I'll try," Malik said finally, his voice thick. "But I'm not sure how." Victor smiled, his eyes warm. "That's all anyone can do. Try." Malik nodded, feeling the last of his doubts settle, at least for now. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't an answer. But it was a beginning. And for the first time in a long while, Malik felt like he might be able to find his way forward. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty and small moments of peace. Malik woke up each morning to the soft sounds of Victor moving around downstairs. Nothing intrusive, just the sound of someone going about their day. The mornings were the hardest for Malik. They felt like the beginning of something new, something he couldn't quite grasp. But as each day stretched on, he began to settle in, slowly getting used to the rhythm of the house, the quiet but constant presence of Victor in his life. Victor never pushed him too hard. He never demanded more than Malik was willing to give. He just let Malik be. And little by little, the tension in Malik's shoulders began to ease. He spent more time in the kitchen with Victor, learning how to make simple meals. Victor would smile at his attempts, even when Malik couldn't get the eggs quite right, or when the pasta boiled over. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. And that felt like enough. Malik knew he wasn't there yet. He knew the journey ahead was still uncertain, and there would be days where he felt like giving up. But for the first time, he didn't feel like he was alone in that struggle. He had someone in his corner, someone who cared, even when Malik didn't think he deserved it. And maybe, just maybe, that was all he needed to start believing in himself again. The weight of change. The first few weeks in Victor's house felt like a blur to Malik. Some days, he woke up feeling like he was still walking through a dream, unsure of how he had ended up in this place. A soft bed, A warm meal, a roof over his head. He was still adjusting, still carrying the weight of the streets inside him. But the longer he stayed, the more he began to settle into a new rhythm. Victor kept to his word. He didn't push Malik into anything he wasn't ready for. He gave him space, allowed him to take his time, and quietly became a steady presence in his life. They spent their mornings together, Victor making breakfast while Malik helped with the simple tasks, stirring the eggs or setting the table. They worked silently but comfortably, the kind of quiet that spoke of trust slowly being built, one small action at a time. Despite the calm, Malik still struggled with the feeling of being an outsider. The warmth of the house, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, the soft hum of the TV in the background. These things were foreign to him. They didn't feel like they belonged to someone like him. He was the boy from the streets, the one who had to fight for every scrap of food, the one who had no time for things like comfort. His mind constantly tugged at him, reminding him that this wasn't his world. It wasn't until one afternoon, after coming back from a walk to clear his head, that Malik realized how much had changed. He opened the door to the house and paused in the doorway. The sounds of laughter and the smell of a fresh pot of soup filled the air. He had never been someone to enjoy the comfort of a busy home, had never seen it as anything but a reminder of everything he lacked. But today, as he stood there, something in him shifted. He wasn't quite ready to call this home, but it was the closest he had ever felt to something resembling it. Victor was sitting at the kitchen table, reading a book. When he heard Malik's footsteps, he looked up and smiled. "Hey, you're back earlier than usual. Everything okay?" Malik nodded, walking over to the table and dropping his bag on the chair. "Yeah, just needed to think." Victor closed the book and set it down, his eyes soft with understanding. "About anything in particular?" Malik hesitated. It felt strange to talk about the things swirling in his head. But Victor was patient, waiting for him to speak. Malik felt the walls inside him slowly crumbling. "I don't know," he said finally. "I guess. I don't really know what I'm doing here, you know. I don't fit." Victor's expression didn't change, but he didn't rush to fill the silence. He let Malik process, let the words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "I get it," he said quietly. "You're still trying to figure out where you fit in this world. And I'm not going to pretend it's easy. But I want you to know something. You don't have to fit in, Malik. Not in the way you think. You just have to be you. And that's enough." Malik didn't know how to respond. His mouth felt dry, and for a moment, he just stood there, staring at Victor. He had heard those words before, "Just be yourself." But they had always felt like empty platitudes, things that people said when they didn't really understand. But from Victor, they didn't sound like a lie. They sounded like the truth. "I don't even know who I am anymore," Malik said quietly, more to himself than to Victor. "I don't know what it's like to not be. Just a survivor." Victor's face softened, and he reached across the table, his hand hovering for a moment before gently resting on Malik's. "That's okay," he said, his voice steady. "You don't need to have it all figured out. Just take it one day at a time, and I'll be here for every step of it." The words lingered in the air between them, and for the first time, Malik felt a flicker of something inside him. Something that wasn't fear or uncertainty, but a kind of quiet hope. He didn't know where this path was leading, but maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to walk it alone. The following week, Malik found himself sitting in the living room, staring at the pile of paperwork in front of him. Victor had suggested that he start looking into enrolling back in school. At first, Malik had been resistant, the idea of returning to a classroom seeming laughable. School had never been a place where he fit in. It was just another arena where he had been out of place, too poor, too scrappy, too different. But Victor had been persistent, encouraging him to at least consider it. And so, Malik sat with the forms, trying to make sense of the questions. What grade are you currently in? What subjects are you interested in? It all seemed so overwhelming, like it was meant for someone else. He picked up the pen and hovered over the first question, his mind racing. He didn't know the answer to most of these. He had missed so much school, bouncing from foster homes to shelters, that the idea of jumping back into a classroom felt impossible. Victor appeared in the doorway, holding a mug of coffee in one hand. "How's it going?" he asked casually, his voice light but carrying an undertone of concern. Malik sighed, dropping the pen onto the table. "I don't know, man. This is way too much." Victor walked over and set the mug down beside the forms. He leaned against the table, looking at Malik. "Hey, it's okay to be overwhelmed. This is a big step, but you don't have to do it all at once. Just fill out what you can for today. We'll take it slow." Malik swallowed hard, feeling his chest tighten. "I'm not sure I'm even smart enough for this. What if they think I'm stupid? What if I don't get it?" Victor's smile was gentle but firm. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. That's all anyone can ask. You're not stupid, Malik. You're a lot smarter than you give yourself credit for. I've seen how quickly you pick things up." Malik shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers tapping on the edge of the table. "I don't know," he muttered. "I've never been good at anything. School was always just something to get through. Never felt like I belonged." Victor's expression softened. "Well, we're going to try something different this time. You belong, Malik. You just have to start believing that. One small step at a time. Okay." Malik didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, staring at the forms, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could feel his old defenses rising up. The fear of failure, the fear of rejection. But beneath that, there was a small flicker of something he couldn't quite name. He wasn't sure if he was ready to let go of all his doubts, but for the first time, he felt like maybe he could. Finally, Malik picked up the pen again. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll try." Victor grinned, clapping Malik on the back. "That's all I'm asking for." The next few days passed in a blur of small victories and setbacks. Malik filled out the paperwork, nervously handed it over to Victor, and waited. Each day, he worked on adjusting to the routine of living with Victor, helping with meals, keeping his room tidy, even trying to get through some of the basic lessons Victor had picked up for him. School registration was a long process, but when the day finally came to visit the school, Malik found himself standing outside the building, staring up at the brick facade. It seemed so big, so intimidating, and for a moment, he wanted to turn around and run. But Victor was beside him, offering him a reassuring smile. "You don't have to be nervous," Victor said quietly. "We'll take it slow. You're doing great, Malik." Malik nodded, though his heart was racing in his chest. He didn't know what to expect. He didn't know if he was ready for the stares or the whispers that would surely follow him. But with Victor by his side, he felt a little less alone. As they walked into the office to meet the principal, Malik found himself wondering if this was the beginning of something new. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he had a chance. Maybe he didn't have to keep running anymore. Stepping into the light. The next few weeks after the school registration were a whirlwind of new experiences and strange feelings. Malik still wasn't sure about the whole school thing, but it had become a reality he couldn't avoid. The first day had been a blur. Walking through the front doors of the school, the weight of everyone's eyes on him, the cold rush of panic that had nearly paralyzed him as he entered his first class. But somehow, with each passing day, the edges of that fear had started to dull. It wasn't easy, but Victor's presence in his life had made things feel possible. By the time Malik walked into his third week of school, something inside him had begun to shift. He was still far from comfortable, but he wasn't hiding in the back of the classroom anymore, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Now he was trying to pay attention in class, trying to understand the lessons, trying to make sense of the world that had seemed so alien to him only a few weeks ago. It wasn't just the school that was changing him. It was everything. His mornings were spent with Victor, eating breakfast in the kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. They were getting to know each other in small ways. Victor sharing stories about his own childhood, Malik telling him bits and pieces of his life, ones he never thought he'd share with anyone. But it felt natural now, as if there was a kind of unspoken trust between them. Like they were both learning how to be something more than just the roles they had been cast into. Malik had learned that Victor wasn't some wealthy businessman who had everything figured out. Victor had his own scars, his own moments of doubt. He wasn't perfect, but he was willing to share his story, to open up in a way that made Malik feel a little less alone. Evenings were the hardest. School had its challenges. Homework, navigating the crowded hallways, figuring out who to trust. But at night, when the house quieted down and Malik was alone with his thoughts, the weight of his past pressed down on him in a way it didn't during the day. He couldn't shake the feeling that any moment someone would figure him out, that he didn't belong, that this life wasn't his. He didn't know how to be part of something stable, something real. He didn't know how to trust that the kindness Victor showed him wasn't going to disappear. But then, one evening after dinner, Victor sat across from him at the kitchen table with a serious expression on his face. "I was thinking," Victor began, his voice measured, "it might be time to start looking ahead a little more. You've made incredible progress, Malik, but I think you could do even more if you started thinking about what comes next." Malik shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" he asked warily. Victor leaned forward slightly, his eyes focused on Malik. "I mean, you don't have to stay stuck. You don't have to keep living the way you were. I know you're still figuring things out, and that's okay, but I think you're capable of more than just surviving. You've got real potential." Malik's stomach twisted at the thought. "Potential? I don't know about that," he said, shaking his head. "I'm just trying to get through the day, you know. I'm not the kind of person who has potential." Victor smiled softly. "I used to think the same thing. But here's the thing, Malik. You don't have to be some perfect version of yourself. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to take the next step. And that's what I want to help you with." Malik swallowed, feeling a knot form in his throat. "What step?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor paused, his gaze steady. "I think it's time for you to think about what you want to do after school. Do you want to finish your education? Do you want to explore a career? I've got some connections, some people who could help you find a path that makes sense for you. But it's your choice. You've got to decide what you want for yourself." Malik stared at the table, the weight of Victor's words sinking in. He had never thought that far ahead. He had never been given the chance. His life had always been about survival, about getting through the next day, the next meal, the next cold night on the street. And now, here was Victor, asking him to think beyond that. Asking him to dream. But Malik wasn't sure how to dream anymore. He had learned to expect disappointment, learned to shut down those hopeful thoughts before they could take root. But something in Victor's voice made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to try. "I don't know," Malik said quietly, shaking his head. "I don't know what I want." Victor nodded slowly. "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to have it all figured out today, but I want you to think about it. I want you to know that the option is there. You don't have to keep running from it." For the rest of the evening, Malik sat in silence, his thoughts spinning. Victor had given him so much already. He had shown him what it meant to be cared for, to be seen. But this was different. This was about the future, about possibilities Malik hadn't even considered, and it terrified him. What if he failed? What if he tried and it wasn't enough? What if he wasn't good enough? But as the evening drew to a close, and Malik found himself standing in front of the window, staring out at the street below, something inside him stirred. For the first time, he realized that he wasn't as alone as he had always felt. He had Victor now. He had a place in this world, even if it didn't feel real yet. And maybe, just maybe, he could take the next step. The following week, Malik found himself standing in front of the principal's office at school, his stomach tied in knots. He had asked to meet with her, to talk about the possibility of finishing his education. It had taken him days to make the decision, to stop second-guessing himself and take the leap. But here he was, standing in front of her door. When Principal Harris opened the door, she greeted him with a warm smile. "Malik, it's so good to see you. Come on in." He stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The room smelled like freshly brewed coffee and old books, and the walls were lined with motivational posters and student achievements. It felt like a different world from the one Malik had known. "So," Principal Harris said, sitting down behind her desk, "what's on your mind?" Malik took a deep breath. I want to finish school," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "I want to catch up. I want to do something that matters." Principal Harris looked at him for a long moment, her eyes kind. "That's a big step, Malik," she said gently. "But I believe you can do it. We can work together to create a plan. Take it one step at a time." For the first time in a long while, Malik felt something inside him stir, something that resembled hope. He wasn't sure what the future held, but maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to face it alone. That evening, after his meeting with Principal Harris, Malik found himself sitting at the kitchen table with Victor. He was still processing everything, still unsure of what this all meant. But as Victor set a plate of food in front of him, Malik felt something inside him begin to shift. It was small, but it was there, the beginnings of something more. "I talked to the principal today," Malik said, his voice soft. Victor looked up from his own plate, his expression expectant. "And?" Malik smiled, though it was faint. "I'm going to try. I'm going to finish school." Victor's face broke into a smile. "I knew you could do it, Malik. I'm proud of you." Malik's heart skipped a beat at the words. He wasn't used to hearing them. "Proud of you." But as he sat there, the weight of it settling in, he realized that he was starting to believe it. Maybe he wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe, for the first time, he was starting to live. And that, he thought, was enough for now. A new beginning. The days that followed Malik's decision to finish school felt like a slow, steady climb. Each morning when he woke up, there was a flicker of something in his chest, a spark of hope that he hadn't known was possible. The journey ahead still seemed daunting, but there was something different now. A sense of direction, a sense of purpose. For the first time in a long time, Malik wasn't just trying to survive. He was beginning to truly live. It wasn't always easy. The morning still felt like a struggle, especially when Malik had to wrestle with his own self-doubt. He would sit at the kitchen table with Victor, looking at the books in front of him, feeling overwhelmed by the years of schooling he had missed. The lessons were often challenging, but Victor was there, patiently guiding him through each one, never rushing him, never letting him give up. Malik had always been good at avoiding failure, at finding ways to get by without being noticed. But now, with Victor's quiet encouragement, he was learning to face the things that scared him. He was learning that failure wasn't the end. It was part of the process. And each time he stumbled, Victor was there to remind him that mistakes were just stepping stones toward something better. It was during one of these study sessions, about a month after Malik's decision to return to school, that he found himself struggling with math. Again, he had always hated math. The numbers, the equations, they felt like a foreign language he couldn't understand. He was trying to work through a problem, his pencil tapping nervously against the paper, when Victor noticed his frustration. "Hey, Malik," Victor said gently, looking up from his own book. "You're doing great. Let's take a break for a minute. You're overthinking it." Malik stared at the page, his head spinning. "I can't get it, Victor. It's like I'm just not built for this." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the exhaustion he felt. Victor smiled softly, standing up and walking over to where Malik was sitting. "You don't have to be perfect, and you're not alone in this. It's okay to struggle, okay? You're learning. That's the important part. Malik felt the weight of Victor's words settle over him like a comforting blanket. He had heard them before. It's okay to struggle. But now, they felt real. Malik exhaled deeply, letting the tension in his shoulders ease, and picked up his pencil again. It wasn't about getting everything right. It was about trying. And for the first time, he allowed himself to take that next step without fear of what might happen if he failed. School was still tough. There were days when Malik felt like he didn't belong, like he was a fraud, pretending to be a normal kid when everything about his past screamed that he wasn't. But slowly he began to see small victories. He started to engage more in class, answering questions when the teacher asked. He no longer avoided the other students. Slowly, he was starting to build connections, even if it was just a few tentative friendships. And though they hadn't said much to him yet, Malik could tell that the other kids were beginning to notice him in a different way. It wasn't the stares of pity or curiosity he had gotten in the beginning. Now it was more like respect. Malik wasn't the kid who was always at the back of the room anymore. He wasn't hiding. He was participating. And that made all the difference. But it wasn't just the schoolwork and the classroom that Malik was tackling. It was also the people. The fact that Victor was still there for him, still encouraging him, still guiding him, made it all seem more possible. It was like he was finally seeing what had been missing from his life all those years. Someone who genuinely cared, someone who believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. Victor's mentorship had been a quiet force in Malik's life, but recently, it had become something more. Victor wasn't just helping Malik with school anymore. He was helping him understand what it meant to be part of something. He was teaching Malik how to build a future for himself, to trust that he deserved a chance at happiness. One afternoon after school, Malik was sitting on the porch swing in the front yard, watching the cars go by. It was a warm, quiet day, and he found himself thinking about his past. It was hard not to. Everything felt so new, so different, and sometimes the weight of the past seemed to creep up on him when he wasn't looking. He missed his mom, more than he cared to admit, and there were nights when he would wake up, unsure of where he was, the silence too heavy in the house. But even in those moments, there was something comforting in knowing he wasn't alone. Victor came out to join him, taking a seat beside Malik on the swing. The two of them sat there in silence for a moment, the soft creak of the swing filling the quiet space. "You okay?" Victor asked, his voice gentle, as if sensing Malik's thoughts. Malik nodded, but he didn't speak right away. It felt good to have Victor ask, to know someone cared enough to check. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "I'm starting to get it," Malik said, his voice quiet but firm. "All this life. I don't know if I'll ever get it completely, but I'm trying. I'm doing better than I was. And I don't want to go back. I don't want to be that kid who just survived anymore." Victor smiled, a look of quiet pride on his face. "I'm proud of you, Malik," he said. "You've come a long way. You're not that kid anymore. You're making a life for yourself." Malik felt something inside him shift at those words, a kind of peace he hadn't expected. He wasn't just trying anymore. He was starting to understand what it meant to be someone. He wasn't the survivor anymore. He was Malik. And that, somehow, felt like enough. As the weeks passed, Malik began to take more and more ownership of his life. He kept up with his schoolwork, slowly but steadily catching up in subjects he'd fallen behind in. He started making more friends at school, though it was still difficult for him to open up completely. He wasn't used to trusting people that much. But the people he had met, his teachers, a few classmates, made him feel like maybe it wasn't such a strange idea after all. One afternoon, about a month after Malik had decided to finish school, Victor sat down with him again at the kitchen table, a serious look on his face. "I've been thinking," Victor began, "and I know you've been working hard with school, but I also think it's time for you to start thinking about what comes next." Malik looked up from his notebook, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Victor leaned forward, his voice calm but direct. You've got a lot of options, Malik. You've got the chance to do whatever you want with your life. I want to help you figure out what that is. What kind of future do you want? Malik sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The question seemed so big, so final. For years, he hadn't been able to think beyond the next meal, the next night on the streets. But now, with the future beginning to unfold in front of him, the question didn't feel as impossible as it once would have. I don't know, Malik admitted. I've never really thought about it like that. I just wanted to get through things, you know. Victor smiled, his eyes warm. I get it, but I think you've got a lot of potential. And whatever path you choose, I'll be here to help you take it. Malik sat there, thinking for a long moment. He had no idea what the future would hold, but for the first time, he realized that he didn't have to face it alone. He had Victor, and he had himself. And maybe, just maybe, that was all he needed to keep moving forward. Later that night, after dinner, Malik stood at the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was waiting for something bad to happen. He wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. He was living. And maybe that was enough. Hey, Malik. Victor's voice broke through the quiet. Malik turned, his eyes meeting Victor's as he walked into the room. You're doing great, Victor said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. You've come a long way. Malik smiled, a small, genuine smile, and for the first time, he believed it.